Today we're going to look at 3-3B, equivalent units and related costs and a cost of production report. The Dover Chemical Company manufactures specialty chemicals by a series of 3 processes, all materials being introduced in the distilling department. From the distilling department, the materials pass through reaction and filling departments and emerge as finished chemicals. The balance in the account work in process filling was as follows on January 1st. The following costs were charged to work in process filling during January. During January, 53,000 units of specialty chemicals were completed. Work in process filling department on January 31st was 2,700 units at 30% complete. So step 1 is where we're going to focus on this problem. Prepare a cost of production report for the filling department for January. Okay. So if we go to our working papers, the first thing we're going to do is fill in our company name, which is Dover Chemical Company. And then the date is going to be for the month ended. January 31st. 2019. Okay, so the first thing we need to do for this cost of production report is calculate the units. Okay, we learned in our chapter PowerPoint that we need to track the number of units that are in our beginning inventory, our work in process, our finished inventory, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we're going to start over here on the left with units, and we're going to start with our first title is going to say units charged to production. I'm going to put our colon there. First, we're going to start with what we have in our inventory. Sorry about that. Inventory in process on January 1st. Okay, so now for this first section, we're just going to be working in the whole units. Okay, for this first section, we're just working with whole units. So if we look at our textbook tells us that as far as our direct materials go, our work in process filling departments, the balance in work in process filling was as follows on January 1st. Work in process filling department, there were 3,400 units. Okay, so that's the number we're going to use as our inventory in process on January 1st is 3,400. Okay, so that tells us we had 3,400 items that were being processed when we started the month. From the filling department, before it hits the filling department, it's in the reaction department. So we need to keep track of how much we've received throughout the month from the reaction department. Okay, how much have we received from the reaction department throughout the month of January? And if we look, the following costs were charged to work in process filling during January. And it tells us direct materials transferred from the reaction department were 52,300 units. So that's where we're going to get that number from. Whoop. So we started with 3,400 units. We've received from reaction 52,300. Now we want to know what are our total units accounted for. By the filling department. So we're going to put a line here and add these two together, and we get 55,700. Okay. We're going to put a double underline underneath this just to show that that's the end of that section. Okay. So we are responsible for a total of 55,700. Now our next section is going to say units to be assigned costs. Units to be assigned costs. Okay. Again, we have a colon because we're going to list things underneath it, so we need to start at the beginning. So our inventory in process on January 1st. Okay. Our book tells us that our inventory in process on January 1st was 3,400 units and they were 60% complete. Okay, they were 60% complete. So in our report, we're going to put that right here. We're going to put 60% complete. We're going to keep track of that. Now, so our whole units is 3,400. This is where we're going to break this down. When it comes to direct materials, when we started January 1st, this 3,400 items were in our work in process. Our employees were working on these items as of January 1st. Okay, they're not finished with them, but they're working on them. However, they have already put all of the direct materials in them in December. So we're not going to have a unit for direct materials because everything was already put in December. There's no cost assigned in January. Okay. Now, our conversion, however, when it comes to like our labor and things like that, that's a little bit different. Okay. We have to figure out how much has not been completed. Okay. How much of this 3,400 is going to be completed in January? So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take the 3,400 and we're going to multiply it times 0.40 or 40%. 60% is done, which means that 40% is not completed. And that's what we want to know, is how much is not completed. And when we do this, we get 1,360. Okay, so that's our number that's going to go in that box. So this tells us that we have 1,360 units that are not completed. Okay, if we were to say these are done and these are not. So that's what we had in process on January 1st. Now we want to know how much was started and completed in January. Okay, so from start to finish, how much do we do in January? If we look in our textbook, it tells us that during January, 53,000 units of specialty chemicals were completed. Okay, 53,000 were completed. However, 3,400 of those were already started when January started. So we're going to take that 53,000 and subtract the 3,400. And we get 49,600. Okay, so that's what was started and completed in January. Now, of that 49,600, all of the direct materials were put in during the month of January. And since they were completed, all of the conversion was put in during the month of January. Okay. Now, we're going to add this because this tells us what we started with in the beginning and what we've completed in this month. So we're going to add these numbers together and we get 53,000, 49,600, and 50,960. Okay. So again, this tells us inventory and process when we started the month, what did we start and complete. Okay. This is the amount that's been transferred to finished goods. This is what we have completed and turned into finished goods. Okay. Now we need to know, what have we started but not completed? Okay, what have we started to create but we haven't finished it yet? So our next line is going to say inventory in process on January 31st. If we look in our textbook, it tells us that on January 31st, there were 2,700 units, 30% complete. Okay, 2,700 units, 30% complete. So right here in our title, we're going to put in that 30%. And our textbook said 2,700 units, so under our whole number, it's going to be 2,700. So of that 2,700, all of the direct materials go in when we begin the process, and we have begun the process. So all of those units are going to be counted under direct materials. It is 30% completed. So 30% of this process has been conducted in January. So we're going to take this 2,700 times the 30%, and we're going to get 810. Okay? Because that's what we've completed in the month of January, and that's the amount of units we're looking for. We're going to put a single line under here and add these together. And we get 55,700, 52,300, and 51,770. Okay. So we took our inventory January 1st, what we were working on, plus what we started and completed, plus what's left in our inventory and process on January 31st. So whole numbers, we get 55,700, which should equal the same number that we have at the top, and it does. These numbers tell us our total units to be assigned costs. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and double underline them to show that we're finished with this section. So this tells us that total we have 55,700 units to assign costs to. It tells us that 52,300 units of direct materials were used in the month of January, and 51,770 units of labor, overhead, etc. were used in January. Okay, so we're going to come back to these numbers when we do the second half of this cost of production report. So set that page aside, and we're going to pull up the one that says cost at the top. Okay, so we're going to start with costs. Where am I going here? Costs per equivalent unit. Costs per equivalent unit. Now under this, we're going to calculate how much per unit, how much cost per unit we have for direct materials and conversion. Okay, so we're just going to be using the first two columns on this because we just want to know how much cost per unit we would use for each. So our first line is going to say total costs for January in the filling department. Okay, total costs for January in the filling department. If we look in our textbook tells us the following costs were charged to work in progress process filling during January, and it says direct materials transferred from the reaction department were 52,300 units at $9.50 per unit for a total of 496,850. Okay, that 496,850 is the number we're going to use. for our direct materials. Okay. Our conversion cost includes both our direct labor and our factory overhead. Okay, it includes both those numbers. So I'm going to go off here to the side, and we had 101,560 and 95,166, and I'm going to add those two numbers together, and I'm going to get 196,726, and this becomes my conversion number. Okay. So this is going to go over here, 196,726. Now we're going to divide these two numbers by our total equivalent units. Okay, so we're going to look back on our form where we calculated our equivalent units for direct materials to be 52,300 and for conversion 51,770. Okay, so those are the numbers we're going to put here. And again, we're going to divide these because we want to know per unit. Okay, so these are going to be divided. So take this number divided by this one, and we get $9.50. This number divided by this one, and we get $3.80. Okay, so this is going to be cost per equivalent unit. So our total costs were $496,850. We created 52,300 units. So it took us down to $950 per unit. And the same with conversion was $380 per unit. Okay. So the next section is going to say costs assigned to production. And a colon because we're going to be listing things underneath it. Again, starting at the beginning, so our inventory and process. On January 1st. And this one our textbook gives us. If we look in our book, it tells us the balance in the work in process filling was as follows January 1st, and it tells us that our total cost was $40,528. We're not going to break this down into pieces. We're going to put them all together. Okay, and then we're going to list our cost incurred in January. And if we look in our textbook, it tells us the following costs were charged to work in process filling, and it gives us those three numbers that we worked with at the top. We're going to take those three numbers and add them together. Okay, so this is the cost that we incurred in January, so that's going to come over here. We're going to put a line under this, and we're going to add those two numbers together. We get $734,104. And that gives us our total costs. Whoops. Accounted for by the filling department. okay? So now our next section is going to say cost allocated to completed and partially completed units. And this one might take you 2 lines to fill in. Costs allocated to completed, whoops, and partially completed. Sorry, I'm having trouble spelling today. Completed units. And again, a colon, because we're going to list things underneath it. Now this time we're going to break it down by equivalent units. So we're going to start with our inventory and process. On January 1, I'm going to stick the word balance here because the balance of that, our book tells us, was that $40,528. Okay. Now the cost we incurred to finish those items, so to complete our inventory and process, for January 1. Again, we had no direct materials because we put all those in during December. And then we have to calculate. So we had 1,360 units. If we look back at our unit paper, we calculated we needed 1,060 units in our equivalent units. We're going to take that 1,060 units and we're going to multiply that times the 380 that we calculated at the top. I'm sorry, $3.80 that we calculated at the top. So when we multiply those out, so once we multiply these two numbers together, we get $5,168. Okay. We're going to put a line under here. Oh, that was supposed to go here. 5,168. We add these two together, we get 5,168. And then we add these two together and we get 45,696. So this tells us the cost of completed from January 1st work in process. Okay. So the cost of the completed January 1st work in process. Now we have to calculate our started and completed. In January. Okay. Our started and completed in January. We're going to take the 49,000 from our started and completed in January from our units. We got 49,600. So we're going to take our 49,600 and multiply it by our $9.50. And when we do that, we get 471,200. Okay. So for our direct materials, we have 471,200. For our conversion, I'm going to take the same number, started and completed in January. Conversion was 49,600. So I'm going to take the same number, 49,600, I'm going to multiply, oh, sorry, my paper's moving. Multiply that by the $3.80. And that number is going to be $188,480. Add these two together, and we get $659,680. Add these two together, and we get $705,376. And this tells us how much the transferred to finished goods in January. Okay, so we moved $705,376 worth of cost to finished goods. Okay. So again, we did our inventory at the beginning. How much does it cost to finish that work? Okay, what did we start and complete in January? So now we have to look at what was still in process at the end of January. So our inventory in process for January 31st. We're going to look back over here, and it says inventory in process for materials was 2,700. So I'm going to take that 2,700 and multiply it by the 950, because we're just looking at materials right now, and I get 25,650. Whoops, sorry. So that's what's going to go in our first spot, 25, I lost my number, 650. And then look at the same line. I'm going to take the 810 conversion and multiply it by the 380. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to get 3,078. So that's what's going to go here. Add those two numbers together. I get 28,728. Add those two numbers together, and I get 734,104. And this tells me my total cost assigned by the filling department. Okay. Now, hopefully, when we did this, if we did it right, your total cost assigned by the filling department up here of $734,104 should be the same as the one down here. Okay. The only difference is this is everything all rolled into one, and this gives you the breakdown of where each amount is coming from. Okay, so they're equal. We checked it. We can double underline it. Okay. Okay, so this was 3-3. From here you can go ahead and try your assignment problems.